Welcome to 21st Century Radio. I'm Dr. Zohara Hieronimus. Laura Kortner is our executive producer, and Anita Brockington, our engineer. We are really quite happy to be joined by Joseph Rowe. Joseph was the interpreter for the French author and agroecologist Pierre Rabhi in his book As in the Heart, So in the Earth, an Inner Traditions 2006 reprint release. In this, Rabhi tells a story through a parable presented by two fictitious elders in an African tribe. They recount for the reader the dramatic and destructive changes that industrial agriculture and all that attends its mindset has done to tribal peoples, their roots, their sense of meaning in the world. And in the same way, Rabhi teaches us through the elders' words that our own greed is like drought is to the land, and a story of indigenous value systems being undermined by modern civilization is the foundation of their conversation, but it shows us how the modern world needs to hear the words of ancient traditions because our destinies are irrevocably linked together through the earth and our heart. So Joe joins us tonight, a very well-known, renowned interpreter who I looked up online, Joseph, to discover how many beautiful things you've been a translator of.
Oh, well, thank you.
And
it's good to be here, Zohara. Can you hear me?
Yes, we
okay.
hear you fine, calling us
Good.
all the way from France at an amazing hour for you, so thank you for being up before the sun to join us.
Yeah, well, luckily I'm somewhat used to it. I'm being a musician as well as other things. So.
Oh, so you're not yet going to bed.
Well, actually, I did take a nap, but I'm...
Very good. Yes, I know the lifestyle. Exactly. Well, when you look, and as I have, Joseph, you are a translator for some very beautiful texts, and many of them about sacred traditions. How did you get involved in this particular project with Pierre Rabhi?
Well, it was unlike virtually any of the other books I've translated. Normally, the publishers I work with, especially Inner Traditions, they discover a book and a French book and ask me to translate it. But in this case, I brought it to them because I've known about Pierre Rabhi and his work and supported it for many years and been a great admirer of his and been dismayed that the mostly language barrier, I guess, has prevented Pierre Rabhi's work from being known in the English-speaking world because it's of a planetary consequence. He's sometimes called the Gandhi of small farmers. And so I brought the book to them. I told them, I really think you should translate this guy, and luckily they agreed.
Well, having read it, it's a beautiful book, and I can see why people of the world might refer to him that way. Share with our audience a little bit about the autobiography of Pierre Rabhi and why he's considered, as you mentioned, the Gandhi of the small farmer, but why in particular he's called an agroecologist and what that means. And then we'll take a look at some of the particulars in As in the Heart, So in the Earth.
Sure. Pierre Rabhi invented the term agroecology, and what it means is a different approach to ecology, which considers human beings as part of the ecology, exactly like animals, plants, or bacteria, and all other living creatures. There's, a tendency to separate man from nature in ecological circles. And so that's what he means by agroecology. But it's also a different approach to farming, a radically different approach, which is, a severe, devastating critique of industrial farming, sometimes called agrobusiness, which is a very destructive kind of farming. And it includes an analysis of really scientific and very impressive analysis of, the effects of agro and industrial farming. And the other question you asked is how did he come to be involved with that?
Well, when we look at his own life, I read in his biography that he grew up in Algiers, but that he's made his life a commitment to understanding this relationship between our hearts and the earth. And in his own experience and in the tellings then, as in the heart, so in the earth, he shows us that this mindset that the earth is a utility and that we're here to extract as much as we can, whether it's from oil or whether it's in order to get more per acre, that it had nothing to do really with either the health of the farmer, nothing to do with the health of the consumer, nothing to do with the health of animal husbandry. So when Pierre Rabhi created this term agroecologist, around when did he begin this work?
Well, actually, it was pretty late. He was born in Algeria of extremely modest parents. His father was a blacksmith, and he was born in the southern part of Algeria, the desert areas, in an oasis called Kendassa. And he had by the way, he describes how people do live in harmony with nature in those oases. So his first experiences of man and relation with nature, at least in the early 30s when he was born, before the westernization started, was one of harmony and a remarkable reciprocal harmonious relationship between human beings and nature. And it's very strange how did a little boy born in these circumstances come to be a world figure like this. It's odd in itself. It's like a strange kind of destiny, because when he was 5 years old, his mother died when he was quite young, and that made things difficult for the family. When he was 5 years old, his father met a French couple who said they would be happy to be his foster parents and adopt him and provide a French education for him. That was in the days, of course, when Algeria was still a French colony. And so even though Pierre himself dreaded it, did not want to leave his home, and was really against it, his father insisted on it, because I think his father had a sense that this boy had a special destiny. Mm-hmm. That's my interpretation. So that's how he became, you might say, Frenchified, learned to speak very good French, and went to a French lycée or high school, graduated from the French high school, which in those days was, quite a intensive education. And then when the Algerian War erupted in about 1960, he came to France, and he didn't. I guess he didn't want to be involved with the war. It was also he had become briefly a Christian. He converted to Christianity. Later on, he decided he was outside of any religious tradition. So he came to France, but found himself in difficult circumstances because he broke with his foster parents. He broke with his foster father. And he doesn't really say this in his autobiography, but he kind of, if you're reading between the lines, I feel that they broke over the independence of Algeria. Mm-hmm. His father was for Algeria remaining a French colony, basically. And
it's a very interesting, when you think about the sort of subduing or the mandated submission by Western technology to the nativistic traditions, it's the same thing then that happened in his life in terms of the culture that became the dominant theme for much of his youth, and then his throwing that off for his own autonomy. It's a very interesting same story, at least from what I'm hearing from you.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's the way I see it too.
It's very interesting. And so when he discovered then that, having been reared sort of in this Western Euro model of thinking and being in the world, and yet coming from a very sort of down-to-earth, rooted tradition with many people who, as he even points out in his book, paying homage to those that don't learn from the written word but learn from the oral tradition. We're talking about billions of people on this planet for whom that is still reality.
Yes.
And so I like
tremendous memories too.
Yeah, exactly. And so I like the fact that as in the heart, so in the earth, reversing the desertification of the soul and the soil pays tribute to the oral traditions of the world, because it really speaks to continuity. And I think that's so much of, at least from what I gained by reading this beautiful book you've translated from French into English, is that we're not talking about separate cultures, we're talking about separate hearts.
Yes, and Pierre Rabhi is, I guess, he's kind of like his own character that he in the book Husseini, in that he is a kind of an ideal hybrid. He's a real meeting of a synthesis of the best of the West, of what the West has to offer, and the best of the East, in his case, of traditional culture. And he found himself in France, broke, jobless, and expelled, cut off from his foster family. It didn't seem at all practical to go back to Algeria, especially with the atmosphere of war and everything. And so he found himself working in a factory for a while, and he became profoundly repulsed by the alienation of that kind of work and the experience of being a worker treated like a machine. So he decided with his French wife, Michelle, to just strike out with their small savings and buy some land in the southern France in a very beautiful area called the Ardèche, but which is also mostly a very arid and infertile area. And it's also one of the poorest regions of France. But in those days, they bought this land for a ridiculously low price, a lot of land, many hundreds of acres. But the local people who lived there said they were completely crazy because that land was unfarmable, and these were experienced farmers speaking, but he stubbornly persisted, and he had come somehow, I don't know how it happened, but he had come into contact with the teachings of Rudolf Steiner, and especially regarding agriculture. And so he had learned biodynamic agriculture.
Yeah, we've talked quite a bit of with a number of farmers over the decades on 21st Century Radio and other programs about the Rudolf Steiner system of biodynamic farming and the use of humus and why you do no-till, and that there's times to do things and there's specific reasons. It's not just if you feel like it, then you will. When you look, we have to take a little break, but when we come back, maybe we can talk about, because I see something here that isn't necessarily in the book because I didn't know until you've described for me and the audience more of Rabhi's, and Pierre's last name is spelled Rabhi, if you want to look him up in a Google search or something, Pierre Rabhi, Rabhi, and you may remember him from his brief campaign in the government. I think more about getting a platform to speak to these important issues than to hold any office, as some people have been known to do who are inspired to see change and see political races as the broadest platform one ever gets. But when we come back to sort of talk about this, that there's an inherent discipline and respect for the land that comes from biodynamic farming, unlike, I think, much of commercial farming, which is really a respect for the commodities market and little for life. Anyway, when we return, Joseph Rowe joins us. Joseph is the interpreter for this beautiful book, As in the Heart, So in the Earth. He translated it from French into English, Reversing the Desertification of the Soul and the Soil by Pierre Rabhi, Rabhi, and you're listening to 21st Century Radio.
Hello, I'm Jason Gregory. I'm the author of The Science and Practice of Humility, The Path to Ultimate Freedom. You can find out all the information about me from www.jasongregory.org. You are listening to 21st Century Radio with Dr. Zohara Hieronimus.
And here we are back again on 21st Century Radio. Welcome. I'm Zohara Hieronimus, and our guest is translator Joseph Rowe. Joseph translated from French into English Pierre Rabhi's beautiful Inner Traditions 2006 re-release, As in the Heart, So in the Earth, Reversing the Desertification of the Soul and the Soil. So I want to come back, Joe, to where we left off, if you don't mind, of Pierre Rabhi being introduced to Rudolf Steiner's biodynamic farming and how he was able to take these hundreds of acres in arid part of southern France where people thought nothing would grow and turned it into, obviously, a beautiful farm and a farming experience. And he has since become and is a renowned international advisor even to the World Bank about sustainability and agroecology. So how did the biodynamic, you think, component in Rudolf Steiner's teachings, why was that such a big new part of his development?
Yes, I'll be happy to answer that, but just one thing that I should have said before
Sure.
is that Pierre is is aware of this interview, wholeheartedly approves of it, and the only reason that it's not him speaking as it should be is that his English is not quite up to it.
And my French, I speak only un peu français.
Okay.
Juste un peu.
D'accord. So anyway, yes, I should say also that when Pierre started adopting the biodynamic practices, he also adapted them. He realized pretty soon in the game that biodynamic farming can become a kind of an overly rigid system.
Yes, very
like
much
any
so.
other system. And that especially in his later work in African countries and with farmers who really need to make a living desperately, he didn't adhere. He found that one needs to be more flexible than that.
Mm-hmm. And that's interesting, too, because he left a Christian theology for a more expanded universalist opportunity. And in the same thing, and I would agree with you, having been a student of anthroposophy and the Steiner writings, that you can become a devotee to a teacher's work and then not grow yourself because you don't take it to where it belongs in the new day.
Yeah, exactly. Right.
Mm-hmm.
It just becomes institutionalized.
Right.
That applies to biodynamic farming like anything else.
Mm-hmm.
He worked wonders, at any rate, with this biodynamic-inspired kind of farming, let's say, in that region in the Ardèche. He absolutely flabbergasted the experienced farmers around there, and quickly the word spread that this guy really has something to teach. And so in the early 80s, I believe it was, he was invited to countries in Africa, especially Burkina Faso, which had been just devastated by agribusiness practices, just productivism, basically decades of rape of the land to produce cotton or other products that wanted by Western markets, monocrop cultures and deforestation and the whole thing. And, a few decades later, the result is the desertification. And, when you cut down a forest, it doesn't rain as much anymore when you cut down a big forest. A lot of people don't realize that.
When it does rain, you just get runoff so that the moisture can't even be held.
Yes, it's a vicious circle.
Mm-hmm.
And at one large oak tree, I forget how many thousands of gallons of water exchange can be accomplished by just one big oak tree.
Mm-hmm.
So clouds don't form over those areas anymore, and it becomes a vicious circle. And so one of the first things which he did in the Ardèche and which he also does in Africa is reforestation, and replanting. Sometimes usually the best practice is native species that will grow well there, to reintroduce those, and water management. The use of that's where Western technology does come in handy, is in landscaping and water management practices to make water available. But I should also say that the policy of agroecology is to use a very minimum of technology, the bare minimum necessary. People don't have tractors generally; they use animals, and that works much better. People may be surprised to hear that because one very little known scientific fact is that agribusiness, the modern industrial type of agriculture with complicated machines and everything, is the least efficient form of agriculture ever devised by humankind.
Mm-hmm. Well, and it makes sense when you look at the cost of the fuel, etc.
Efficiency is defined as input over output, and how much energy you get out of it,
right,
according to how much
versus
you put
what
in
you
it.
have to put in.
And when they calculate, when the official, governments all over the world, when they calculate the costs of modern agriculture, they don't count things like subsidies for gasoline, subsidies for this, which are paid by guess who.
Right, exactly. The taxpayer are underwriting whole industries, as we've seen in much of farming, whether it's beef cattle for the meat industry or whether it's grazing land for the milk industry. When we look, though, and I'd like to look, if you don't mind, Joseph, at some of the big philosophic pieces of Pierre Rabhi's teachings and why this book, As in the Heart, So in the Earth, is such a beautiful way to communicate it, because it's not just about agribusiness. It's about the heart of society that instituted agribusiness and the heart of the people that lost their own native ways and how they're being restored. And thank God they are. We seem to be at a sort of at a tipping point of indigenous peoples appreciating that what they gave up initially by their youth culture, who were infatuated by the West and the Western world and what they saw on television or in the cities, they now see the deforestation and the ruination of their ability to even grow their own land, grow their own crop, because of the commodity market insisting that they not have fertile seed. So talk to us a bit about how Pierre Rabhi and his community of agroecologists have addressed this sort of Monsanto desire to eviscerate the right of the farmer to grow crop and harvest their own fertile seed.
Well, yes, Zohara, you're getting to the heart of the matter now. In fact, yes, it is fundamentally a question of attitude towards the land. If you see the land as just a material object to be exploited and used to maximum benefit, then it really doesn't matter whether you're organic or what. You're going to be you're going to have really an attitude which is deficient, which is soulless.
Right, a conquest attitude.
Which lacks what these traditional people have always had, and which farmers everywhere have always had until recently, which is a reverence towards the earth, and a kind of a sense of the sacred, a sense of gratitude for toward the earth, and a concern for giving something back to the earth and not just taking from the earth, and seeing the earth as a living being. And this is like one thing Pierre says, for example, is that it's better to eat produce just as a consumer. You're a lot better off eating produce that's not grown organically, but is grown by a small farmer who has great respect for the land and uses maybe a very minimum of pesticides or something only in emergencies, or but can't qualify as organic, but has a really good attitude towards the land and an attitude of reverence, than it is to eat produce that's grown by one of these industrial organic farms. Mm-hmm. Because now we have that, and you may have noticed it in markets all over the U.S. and see this in Europe too, like apples, organic apples that have no taste.
Well, and it's interesting because the role of human intention, as the elders in As in the Heart, So in the Earth speak to, and I think that all of modern, physics teaches us that this is true, that intention is everything, and that our intention and the love of a person's hands and hearts in the soil and their attitude is in fact part of what nature then responds to by producing these delicious products, or healthy animals, or healthy children, or good ideas. And so when he says that, it reminds me a bit of Batman Galish, who worked with prisoners during the Iranian Revolution, actually, and he was in charge of all the prisoners and those suffering from cancer and arthritis and demobilizing headaches. He could only give them aspirin and water, and so he's now become a water doctor. And he says the same thing. It's better to drink any kind of water as long as the people who are handling the water are conscious of the importance of the water. So whether it's a well water or stream water, he said just drink water, but try to get water that has intention in it. So when Pierre speaks to this, that it's better to eat from a small farm, and it may not be yet certified organic, than it is to buy organic foods from these big industrial organic farms, then what we're talking about is the role of human love.
Exactly.
And so when he speaks about desertification, it's not just of the soil, but as the subtitle suggests, of the soul.
Yeah, they go together. Yeah, they certainly do. And we're never going to have the change that we all want in our relationship to the earth without that change of heart. That's part of his critique of green parties also. Mm-hmm. Everywhere he points out that they consistently fail everywhere they've failed. I mean, it doesn't matter what country. The green parties always fail. And it's very simple in his analysis why they fail, is they don't speak to people's hearts. Mm-hmm. They just talk about how bad things are.
Yeah, it's an anger movement.
They offer a scientific analysis, and there's no sense of the sacred. In fact, they're actually... even to invoke the word sacred is embarrassing in a political context, and
so we're really talking about this whole paradigm shift that we often talk about on 21st Century Radio. That while we have advanced technology, we have to accelerate our inner natures to be as advanced as our tools.
Yes, to be to use them or to use them wisely or to not use them wisely. Yeah.
And so when you look at this, because James DeMeo, who worked on desertification, found that the more brutal a culture, the more desertified it became, and saw the whole Saharasia development of desert following a paternalistic deprivation of women and children.
Yeah, that's interesting. I didn't know about that, but it's not surprising.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not surprising. The environment reflects, the state of the environment reflects the state of the soul.
And
the people.
And so Pierre's work then in agroecology, and maybe we could now turn our attention to this, is that the realm of the sacred can involve everybody listening, whether they're doing potted plants in their apartment or a small backyard garden.
Yes. Yes, it's really good to have some contact with the earth, even if it's only a potted plant. You're right. That's a good point. Even if it's just a simple potted plant, I would invite everybody to just try an experiment, if you haven't already, perhaps, is just to establish a relationship with that plant where you consider it as a you and not just as an it, and offer in your attitude to the plant respect for another living being, which for all you know may be may have some form of intelligence and you may be able to communicate with me. Who knows? At least be open to that possibility, and you'll find that. You develop a green thumb.
Yeah, well, what I find so interesting about Pierre Rabhi's work, and until I saw your book From Inner Traditions, I myself was really ignorant of his work, and I'm so glad now to be introduced, Joseph, because of your translating work and your teammanship with Inner Traditions to make it available, that it's not about farmers becoming farmers for profit. It's about being sustainable for yourself, and that's a movement that he is behind globally, which is beautiful. It's sort of like the new homesteading movement that's coming again in the United States of America.
Uh-huh. I don't know about that movement, but it sounds good.
It's small, but it's coming. It is, as we say. So speak to us about the underlying principles, the additional principles that Pierre Rabhi is teaching to, let's say, institutions like the World Bank. How does his awareness of spirit, love of the earth, reverence for our ancestors, reverence show up in a World Bank policy?
When he speaks to people, I think he's after his experience as well as being raised as a Muslim, then he became a Christian, then he dropped all religion, but an enormous influence in his life later on was Krishnamurti.
Yes.
And so that I think taught him to be very delicate about any kind of reference to belief systems or trying to anything that might sound like preaching or anything like that. But what he does, when I've heard him speak, he has an incredible presence, and he talks in very simple terms, and yet he also speaks. It's obvious from his speaking that he has a lot of technical knowledge, and but he only displays his technical knowledge in as much as it's necessary and no more. And he has the courage, I guess you'd say, to share with the audience, even World Bank type people in their suits and ties, his sense of wonder and just marveling and gratitude toward the earth and toward the processes of nature. His sense of the sacredness of nature, without necessarily even using the word sacred.
Right. Well, and I think that's one of the things Krishnamurti, also having been a fond devotee in my earlier years of Krishnamurti's writings that you could get in English. And when he's called a farmer without borders, it's a beautiful description. Really, all farmers are without borders when we speak of farming as a relationship. And I think that's what I get so much from the parable told, the fictitious, but it could have been a very real parable of these native peoples, talking about the destruction of their culture and the fleeing of the youth, and the youth not having any interest in the traditions of their ancestry, and yet then finding that they really found no value in what they thought was important, of having this or having that, or dressing like a white person. He even talks about black people with white souls and white people with dark eyes. And I mean, the language is very much as an ethnic person might speak to having their tribal culture eviscerated.
Right. Yeah, it's not only just a beautiful parable, but anybody who knows Africa can tell you that it's a very accurate description of what has been happening all over Africa for many decades now. It's a very, alas, familiar story.
When you've heard him speak, and when you started to tell us, so when he would speak to the World Bank community, and while informed by many sacred traditions as well as spiritual mystery traditions, I would have to say, having studied Krishnamurti, that what you're saying is that he speaks universally to the heart. Right.
And beyond any kind of doctrine. Or, he gave this, when I interviewed him, I remember, I'm not sure I can remember the exact words right now, but he gave a beautiful definition of the sacred. And I told him that I really liked that definition, and he said, "Oh, well, I'm glad you like it, but don't, the sacred is beyond any definition. It's beyond. We've got to be very careful about trying to define the sacred." And he said, maybe we shouldn't even use the word a lot of times to keep it sacred. But he communicates this sense of the sacred. Even he might be speaking just about the farming practices and the need for people to be able to feed themselves and not depend on the outside world. That was one of the hardest things that he had to convince these bankers of, is that it's unhealthy for any society to not be self-sufficient in food.
Agreed.
And their model before that, the World Bank model before that, they've only very recently begun to change. It was that no, it's better in the name of interdependence.
Right.
It's better if people can't feed themselves because they'll just grow a real great cotton crop and get money for that, and no, the more ancient wisdom says, feed yourself first. Mm-hmm. Use the land to feed yourself. Then, after you've established that harmonious relationship, you can maybe think about cash crops. But only after you've
and I think so much of that, I mean, in the Jewish teachings, it's taught that when you give to the poor, first you take care of your family, then you take care of your neighbors, then you take care of your neighborhood, then you take care of your community, then your nation. Only as you get to the outer perimeter of all those other obligations do you reach out beyond it. And you're right, the post-World War II doctrine was codependency. It's not even interdependency. It's more. That's right. It's an illness, actually. It's not they're not healthful relationships, because at the top of them is the autocrat, or the anyway. When we return, perhaps we'll look at some of the teachings that are in As in the Heart, So in the Earth, that we've not touched on. Reversing the Desertification of the Soul and the Soil by Pierre Rabhi, and you can look up Pierre's work online, Rabhi, if you don't know of his work. Joseph Rowe joins us currently. He was the translator for this book and several other wonderful titles from Inner Traditions. Getting well or staying healthy is a partnership between you and your healthcare providers. The Ruscombe Mansion Holistic Healing Center in Baltimore has been creating these partnerships since 1985. Children and adults go to Ruscombe for natural, non-toxic, and non-invasive therapies like homeopathy, acupuncture, herbal treatments, nutrition, massage, yoga, meditation, psychotherapy, and more. Eating well, exercising, and living a rhythmic lifestyle all add to good health. Looking for options to improve your quality of life or for someone you love? Visit us online at www.ruscombe.org or call us at 410-367-7300. That's www.ruscombe.org or 410-367-7300. Ruscombe, where healing is a shared journey.
This is Sarah Stanford Seidelman. I'm the author of Swimming with Elephants, and you can learn more about my work, including soul retrieval and spirit animals, at followyourfeelgood.com. You are listening to 21st Century Radio with Dr. Zohara Hieronimus.
Welcome back to 21st Century Radio. I'm Zohara Hieronimus. Currently online with us is Joseph Rowe, joining us all the way from France. He is the translator for Pierre Rabhi's beautiful Inner Traditions release, As in the Heart, So in the Earth, Reversing the Desertification of the Soul and the Soil. But anyway, the book we're talking about is a beautiful telling, a fictional parable from African elders who speak to the reality of industrial farming and how first they came with the white powders and the poisons and destroyed the land that way. And then there was a great deal of slaughtering of animals for skins and horns, and people not understanding what this brutal trade was in the animals that they had grown to count on, either for food or just to take care of, or to understand that they had their own place and purpose. And then a change in the generations, that there weren't even enough, in this parable again, youth in the village to be the inheritors of the oral tradition. And it was a really stunning thought for me when I read this book, As in the Heart, So in the Earth, Reversing the Desertification of the Soul and the Soil. I mean, imagine if your society depended on an oral tradition, as this did, and your youth population had, because of a grand change in the culture, been driven into the cities and trained in a foreign language to do foreign work that was not at all anything that anybody in the tribe had ever done or would ever do or could do, and that your last elder were about to pass away and had no youth who had the burning desire to be the keepers of the story. And I think the parable is really a parable, and Joseph now rejoins us from France, that it's a parable about our whole society, that the oral tradition in the Jewish teachings represents the teachings of the mothers, which is compassion and intuition and spiritual intuition, and the teachings of our fathers is the written word and the written languages and the written sciences, etc. And so in this way, we really are at this tipping point, Joseph, I guess, and that's what this parable in this story, as in the heart, so in the earth, tells us, is that we are all meant to be keepers of this oral tradition, of this earth tradition, that we are all earth people, as my husband is famous for saying.
Yes. However different our ways of life may be, that's certainly the thing that unites us all, and as we're being forced to realize that now.
Exactly, and it seems, it's interesting, people have always said what you do to the lowest among you, you do to everyone, and so if the African nations have been decimated by sort of industrialism from the West, which is very true, and trying to, benefit by the labor all the way from the slave trade at the beginning to current rape of commodities and mineral rights. So, too, to the rest of the world. I mean, whatever we do to somebody else is done to us at some point in cycles of incarnations, if not in this one.
Yeah, well, one thing in this incarnation, an obvious, very severe price we pay is increasing alienation and soullessness in our own societies. When we build a society that's based on the treachery, exploitation, and cheating, robbing other societies, we ourselves become more, even in very indirect ways, even though the children of these people may not even know about their fathers, what their fathers are. Terrible business in Africa is really about, but they pay the price in a form of alienation, and you don't just do a crime like that, engage in a life of essentially criminal exploitation of others, without becoming losing part of your soul,
And I think that's why Pierre's writing and your effort to help bring it to the West is so vital, because what he's saying is that these stories that these African elders and tribes have experienced is our story too. I mean, the decimation of our own topsoil and the decimation of our own waterways and our own airways is really no different. It's just masked over by, production that's completely out of line with the resource. Right.
Small farmers the world over have common interest in that. Small and medium farmers, when they get beyond a certain size, then it gets more problematic, I believe. Mm-hmm. But I guess I tend to believe small is beautiful. But in any case, that's certainly true, what you say, and that is the teaching, one of the core teachings of this book and the parable.
No, and I think it's beautifully done, because you don't really ever get the sense that you're reading fiction. You feel very much that you're reading about an elder trying to pass on his story to the man with the word traps, as he referred to the cassette recorder.
Yeah, it's very believable. Yeah.
It is. No, and so that one doesn't feel separate at all from the telling, and I think it does give you a true sense of sadness of what people are unconscious that these generations are kind of wreaking havoc. But I really do believe, and I think like this book and others who have been in this work for so long, that things are changing and people are beginning to hear the song of their heart and are beginning to listen to the sacred in the earth. And people like Pierre Rabhi and yourself to, make sure his words get to the West is another sort of addition to that chant.
Yes, it's so important to be able to express what's in our hearts, even whether it's like in Pierre Rabhi in his brief entry into politics. He was kind of pushed to do that by his friends. He had no interest in self, but it was just he ran for president just to get the ideas out. And one of the things he insisted on in the meetings is to invite people to really expose their emotion, their sense of despair living in this kind of society, and their sense of hopelessness and their sense of being a cog in a machine, and in a meaningless kind of existence, without any relationship with the earth, and he found that, and everyone found that this, instead of making things sadder, it made things more. It's like a tremendous relief. At last, in a political process, people can speak from the heart instead of just speaking about this strategy would be better, that would be better. This guy is a good guy, that guy's a bad guy. That people speak from their hearts in the political process.
Yeah, I know
it's a different kind of politics.
People in Israel and Palestinians who are working with that. It's called compassionate listening, where they say if we can't hear each other's stories, we have no place to meet each other. So meetings take place in the heart, and that's what I get from this beautiful book, that when we come from our hearts, when we eat, when we bless our food, when we give thought to the bounty that God gives us. And that's why I think you'll find James DeMayo's work fascinating, and why it couples up with sacred traditions, that prayer, which is really reverence and in action, actually can help make it rain. In the Bible, Adam had to pray for rain, so it's merciful. Well, look, I want to thank you. You've done a beautiful job, and I just am so glad that Inner Traditions heeded your suggestion, Joseph, and that as in the heart, so in the earth, reversing the desertification of the soul and the soil is available for all of us.